There is no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. We don't celebrate murders, and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. And any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our deeply held principles of justice.
New York's police chief with strong words this afternoon after an outpouring of support for the killing of United Healthcare CEO outside a hotel in Manhattan. The suspect, Luigi Mangione, is still in custody in Pennsylvania. The prosecutors are hoping he will waive his extradition to New York. He was indicted today here in New York on murder in the first degree and murder as an act of terrorism, among other charges. But despite being accused of a summary execution of a man shooting him in the back, a new poll from a reputable pollster found that 41% of people aged 18 and 29 think the killing was either somewhat or completely acceptable. And that sentiment is echoed across social media. As Sam Adler-Bell asks in New York Magazine, anger, schadenfreude, cynicism, glibness, bloodlust. What does it say about our country that a murderous spectacle was greeted this way? Had a latent appetite for vengeance, for coercive violence, for revolution even, been revealed? Sam Adler-Bell, contributor to New York Magazine and co-host of the fantastic podcast Know Your Enemy, joins me now. Great to have you here.
Hi, it's great to be here.
I really liked what you wrote because I've been thinking about the story a lot. I have truly struggled and wrestled with how to talk about it and think about it.
It's hard to talk about it. It's scary to talk about it on live TV.
It is. Well, I think the reason is that, and I'll just start with this, is that I think summary execution and murder in cold blood of a man on the street is bad.
Extremely bad.
And I think also celebrating it is toxic to the soul.
It is.
I also am interested in understanding why that was the case.
Yeah. I mean, I was disturbed by it too. I mean, it was a weird couple of days. I did see some posts that were glib. I saw some posts that were celebratory. I saw a lot of posts, especially just kind of comments on newspaper articles where people said, of course I don't want this guy to be killed. Of course I don't. And also, I'm very concerned about the healthcare system. Somehow that was ignited in people, and that's just a fact. It did happen.
Well, I think there's so many layers here. So one of them is, to me, the era of social media and that kind of glibness and distance we have where I mean, particularly images out of Gaza, some of the truly most horrible things I have ever seen in my life.
Worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
Just on repeat. And I think, and there's a school shooting yesterday in Madison, that there's a kind of desensitization, a darkness that's happening.
Well, there's one thing about that I wanted to say is that I think there was a treatment of this like, oh, we never do this. We never do this thing where we go online and argue about whether someone is worthy of execution. But actually, it happens online every day.
That's like an online ritual.
I follow people on the left for the podcast. I follow a lot of people on the right. I see people justifying summary execution all the time, whether it's a vigilante, a police officer shooting somebody mowing down a protester, or yes, a civilian in Gaza or a civilian in Israel. I see this online all the time. So it's kind of an American pastime to go online and argue about who is worthy of life and who is deserving of death. So I didn't really feel that this was opening up some new, totally surprising thing. But it's a disturbing phenomenon. I think it really speaks to this basic logic of human disposability. And that's a phrase that I use in the piece, and it's a phrase that my friend Pat Blanchfield uses in his work about gun violence. We have kind of conceded unknowingly, unconsciously, sometimes consciously, to a system where certain lives are grievable and worthy, and some are not.
I remember years ago when I was backpacking through Argentina, there was a guy who was clearly a very reactionary guy, and he was telling me we were going to Brazil, and he was telling me we were going to Brazil as a kind of like gross and sort of coded racist statement that like life was cheap in Brazil. He told me and I think about that phrase all the time where like there is a certain kind of cheapness to life in America. And you wrote this, you said, it's a terrible thing to destroy human life for the sake of propaganda and a terrible thing to do so for the sake of profit. Americans are dying, going bankrupt, wallowing in despair under a healthcare system that prioritizes the profits of some over the basic needs of others. Where should they turn? Who is listening? This is one thing that I also thought was part of this reaction is this was the center of our politics for so long.
Healthcare.
I have done so many articles and segments on healthcare fights. And then the two parties achieved, for their own reasons, this kind of like cold peace over it. And I think one of the things you saw in the reaction here,
Yeah.
aside that kind of dark death drive online, was that, like, we've just stopped talking about this entire system. Doesn't mean that people are like, oh, it's all working now.
No, it's definitely not. Definitely not all working. People are still really upset by it. And like I said, I mean, the connection, what I was trying to do in the piece is draw a connection between this awful act of gun violence, a homicide, and the logics of our healthcare systems, but other big systems that govern our lives. And I think that what it comes down to is that human disposability. Certain lives are fungible, that we can treat them as means to ends. And I think we have to really do battle against the systems in our life that create that.
You said democracy, really like this sentence. You're a fantastic writer. It said democracy cultivates in us moral impulses, imagination, and desires that demand satisfaction. Violence is alluring when they can find no plausible outlet, when the system that governs us, our lives, are overzealous in containing our fugitive hopes. I do hope there's something that comes out of this that isn't just that kind of death drive and move on to the next. I do worry that the kind of attentional environment in which we live selects for that rather than the sort of cultivating of moral impulses that we all need to care for each other. Sam Adler-Bell. Great piece. Check out Know Your Enemy. It's a great podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.